Well, hello friends. It is a little overcast today, but it's actually a really nice, cool day to be able to work outside. And I have a new area behind me that we're gonna actually work in today. Now, I have been edging really early this year because we had such great weather. So I edged most of my beds around my farm here. Now, I usually only do that every few years, maybe every other to every 3 years, depending. It doesn't push the mower into the edge. My deck of the mower is able to go over the edge. So really that edge stays really nice and clear for a long time. But this bed behind me is a mostly shady bed. And I really brought the bed out and you can see all this fresh soil. I extended the bed around my pathway in the shady area. Now we're gonna tackle a few things today. We're gonna talk about how the maple can have shallow roots and what that does to this shady area. We're gonna also talk about how I try to help the soil when I'm planting a new area like this, amend it slightly without overdoing it, because I do think you can slightly over amend on the first planting sometimes. And then we're also gonna start planting some really fun things for the shady area. I don't have Hosta yet. It's a little early in the year to go get some new Hosta, but I'm gonna plant a lot of Hellebores or Lenten roses today. The wind or breeze is picking up today and we are facing the south, so it could get a little windy. I'm gonna try to stick one direction so you don't hopefully hear that wind noise, but if you do, that's part of living out here in the open area. Now this area to tackle really overall is kind of a tricky area. So last year, if you remember, I put in a new path. It's being extended this year, but along that path has just one stretch of shady area. And in past years, I've tried different things in this area, tried Hosta, and they do fairly well. So that's why I'm comfortable extending the bed slightly. What I like is up against the path, it was maybe a little drier shade. When I get out into the yard here where I've extended it, it usually stays a little bit more moist. And that to me is key with some of these plantings. So anytime you're looking for a shady area, you do want to know whether it's dry, whether it's shady, if you have extra alkaline soil or acidic soil. So things like Hosta they kind of like that acidity, but other things like Hellebores usually actually like a neutral or slightly more other side of the scale, a little bit more alkaline. So you can amend with some lime if you would want to kind of neutralize it too. So what I'm going to do now is show you what I'm going to do to this area, show you how I'm amending it slightly and what we're going to do. So if we look at this new swath, you can see I brought it out. It was kind of more up in here and I brought it out a ways out here and then less over there. But really what I'm doing is I first removed all the sod and I did that by hand. Anytime, so when I was re-edging here recently, you can see I re-edged all around here and brought out some new area for the bed. I do all that by hand just because I don't always want to rent a sod cutter, or it seems kind of not maybe too big enough area to rent a sod cutter. But what I have here is really nice soil, and I'm going to amend it with some of the organic land and sea compost I've been using here for quite a bit now. Now, if you have homemade compost, which I do too, I love to use my home compost. It just depends how much I have and where I want to use it. Sometimes I strategically will ration my homemade compost and buy some really good organic compost when available, which you know I love Espoma's products here. But what I love about it is it's going to slowly enrich the soil, and I can add some of it every year or some of my own compost just to keep adding some great organic material to this soil. It's already nice and I do have really good soil here in Iowa, but adding organic matter is just gonna help the nutrients and the actual overall makeup of that soil. So what I did was removed all the grass, as much roots as I could get. But yes, this is a maple right here, and maples are known to have shallow roots. And it does have some shallow roots in here, so that's gonna be the one tricky part. We'll have to plant around those roots if we need to. But you know what, I've been doing it my whole life anyway, so I'm not too worried. Now, instead of amending each hole individually as I plant them, I'm going to actually just lay these bags of compost over the soil and then rake it all in. In this case, I don't feel like I need to amend each hole because it's nice soil. I want this compost to really act as a top dressing and slowly work its way down as needed without having to go with each hole individually. As I'm raking it, notice what I'm doing is really working it in with the top few inches of the native soil. That to me is the best way if you want to top dress with an amendment, to just slightly work it in. And then as I dig each hole, it will work into those holes too. Now what I did make sure to do when I was taking out my sod, I noticed there was a low spot here in the center. I somewhat am making sure I bring this soil in so that low spot isn't quite such a dip here, which is just a natural thing from the topography here. And I think when I originally took out probably over like about 12 years ago, some of the sod here for the Hosta bed, I think It probably came from that low spot. But I had sod all the way up to here, grass. So I took all this area out. And that's why I just want to be able, this grass has been here. This is an old farm, over 100 years, 150 years maybe. So I really just want to be able to add something to the soil, because over time, other than me fertilizing and trying to enrich the soil, nothing has really been done to that grass soil. So when I can, I like to do things like this. And then probably for successive years, we'll be top dressing with some of either my compost or this same compost. So now that I have it all really done, I think an important thing to remember is when you're working under trees, you don't want to add too much soil. So sometimes we're tempted, or we see landscapes where people put block around a tree and then add tons of soil and plant. Guess what's not good for your tree? Adding tons of soil and actually increasing the grade around the tree. So when I plant a tree, I stress keep that root flare open, keep it exposed. Same thing is true of a very established tree. I don't want to add soil around the trees. I don't want to build it up, because what that does over time is make the tree push roots higher and try to still reach that oxygen level they want. So don't just pile soil or mulch on around your tree. I'm doing it in between the trees where there aren't as many roots. I'm not doing it up around the trunks of either one of these trees, the maple or the crabapple behind me. I'm making sure to keep those root flares, even the established ones, exposed. And I actually will show you later, I took soil away from that crabapple that had built up too much. So what I'm going to start doing, I have 12 or 15 of some hellebores I just bought, but then I also have some in a container under my kitchen window that I had planted just for spring interest, and I'm going to bring them back here. So a lot of times that's what I'll do, is I'll buy things early in the spring, put them in a container, and then if they're not for that container for the whole season, I put them back in the ground. I like to use perennials in containers. So I'm doing quite a few different ones. These lately I've really been loving. I have some of these up against my shed, and it's the Rio Carnival Honeymoon series. I mean, the colors on these are absolutely beautiful, and they've been blooming so well for me. So what I'm going to do is just start setting all these out, spacing them slightly, because I will intermix some hosta later. I'm going to finish up with these ones I just pulled from the planter under the kitchen window, which are a slightly different variety. They're still a hellebore, but you can tell they get a little bit taller, which I'm fine with. So really what I'm doing here is random. I have usually sets of 3 of everything I'm planting, and I want them to be intermixed. Slowly over time, the clump does get larger. Now, when we want to talk about watering, because this is under trees, it depends. Certain years, this actually stays pretty moist in areas. If we have a drought year like we did last year, I will definitely have to supplement these with water. But the great thing about hellebores, once they're established, which can take a year or two, they actually become slightly drought tolerant. So that's a great thing to plant under a tree or in an area that could get dry. So I want to give you a good representation here. Obviously, not everything is going to have roots. This is actually pretty nice soil. When I go down in, I'm able to make a pretty nice, easy hole here. And you can see it's really nice and loamy, meaning this is nice soil. You can see that wind is taking some of it away. This is going to be a nice area to plant some of these. Now, I will always, like I said, anytime I am planting anything, I will amend with biotone. Now, sometimes I throw different fertilizer in the hole with the biotone. In this case for hellebores, I don't feel I need to. They like a slightly alkaline soil. That's really what I have. It's well draining already. So this top layer of compost, you can see as I go to plant, is really gonna work into the hole too. I took one out, and see how nice that root structure is? That's what you wanna see. You wanna see root growth, but you can also see it's time to get these in the ground. They're starting to wanna circle in there. So I'm just gonna rough it up slightly. Hellebores have more vigorous roots than people think. They don't love to be moved after they're established. So I would definitely know where you want to put them and not have to move them. You can split them and move them later on, but I always think they really like to kind of just be in their area. So I'm just slightly working this up a little bit. And then I'm just going to plop it right down in here. Now the big thing is, I don't want to plant anything too deep. So I will always check when I'm planting something, how I'm planting it, and make sure it's not going to be too deep when it's done. Because just like peonies, just like any perennial, if you plant that crown too deep, it can actually rot. So I'm putting all this soil back around it. I will water these when I'm done, but that's how simple it is to plant now, quite a few more. But then once we get them in, it will all be done. Now, I don't always put the tags beside them, but on some of them here I will, just so I remember. I mean, look, who is not excited to see this next year? A couple of them are blooming now, but next year, so many of them are going to. And we're supposed to get rain this weekend, so it's the time to plant. In total in this area, I planted 18 hellebore. So as you enter this pathway, you come to this shade garden, and I wanted it to have a big impact of those 3 and 3, so I grouped those together, but you could group any of them together. And like I said, I have 3s of each one, so there are 4 different varieties, 3 each of all the others. And I like that because there's gonna be pops of varying colors throughout, and then eventually these Hosta, so right now the Hosta are only on this half. That new half I'll add Hosta to this year. And what will be nice is, these are semi-evergreen. Hellebores are semi-evergreen, so they have some green on them year-round, so they're year-round interest. But then during the summer, when these don't bloom anymore, there's gonna be a big clump of them, but the Hosta will come up and add that great texture and color, which is really nice. The clumps of tulips are actually from when my grandma lived here, so I just have never brought myself to move them because they remind me. She only lives 5 minutes away now, but it just reminds me of something she had here, so I keep those there too. So the reason I didn't amend the other half with that compost is because it's already somewhat established with lots of Hosta in it. And I have year to year added things like compost. What I will probably do here in another month is get some Hosta, and we'll do a follow-up video where I fill in with some Hosta. And after that point, I will mulch it with a hardwood mulch too, just to retain that moisture, suppress any weeds. You know, shade areas for me have always been pretty much one spot. This one. I don't really have a lot of shade in my yard. I have some big trees, but overall it gets a lot of dappled sun or a lot of pretty much just full sun during the day. So this is my one area that I can play in some shade areas, and I really want to enjoy it, and so that's why I'm adding these. This year, obviously, I'm gonna need to water them as needed just because they are a new planting. Once established though, I feel pretty good about their drought tolerance, except for actual extreme times, which I will have to water. The one thing with hellebore, I find they can be a little bit harder to find, and they can be kind of expensive. I have found them for as small as $12 a piece, which is still kind of pricey, all the way up to $22 a piece. So it really depends. You know, in the past I've put in like 1 or 3 at a time. This year I went kind of full in and invested in quite a few of them, as you can see, because I want this area that I just extended to really be able to fill in properly. And it's a great time to get them in here in the spring. Transplanting wise, if you have some old ones, it's best to do it right after they bloom. So anytime from April to May every year, I would say transplant your hellebores or split them if you're wanting to. And then they can establish before, over the summer, before winter hits again. A second part of this video will come up in maybe a month or 2 when I'm able to get some Hosta in, and I will start putting Hosta in here so you can see the overall look of this area that I have recently edged. This whole backyard is really gonna transform this year when that path is extended all the way down and I'm able to really plant more of those drought-loving perennials in. Behind me, you can't see it, but coming up already are the salvias, are the black-eyed Susans, the baptisias, the grasses. And so to be able to extend that all the way down is really gonna be exciting. So keep checking back. A lot more is gonna happen in the garden because the garden's always changing, right? Whether we do the work or not, the garden's gonna keep growing.